has served a very valuable role historically. After all, it was Republicans who created the EPA under executive order in the 1970s, and this body has passed many pieces of legislation since the 1970s to focus upon improving our air and improving our water quality. And we have much to celebrate. Actually, those 6 criteria pollutants under the NAAQS program since 1980 are down 63%. We have made progress as a country, but we have work to do, and the EPA has a very valuable role in partnering with the states to carry out those steps to ensure improving our air quality and protecting our nation's waters. So, Senator Carper, I'm hopeful that in response to your concern about the role of the EPA, I believe it's a very valuable role, and it's something that we should focus on in partnering with our states. With respect to mercury, the litigation that you referred to, there was no argument that we made from a state perspective that mercury is not a hazardous air pollutant under Section 112. Our argument focused upon the cost-benefit analysis that the EPA failed to do. And the Michigan v. EPA case, the Supreme Court actually agreed. So it was more about the process, again, that the EPA was supposed to go through in regulating mercury to provide certainty to those in the marketplace, not a statement with respect to whether mercury should be regulated or not under Section 112. Thank you, Senator Inhofe.
Thank you, General. I'm glad you brought up this thing about the Clean Air Act. The amendments from 1990, I was one of the co-sponsors. It's been incredibly successful. I mean, you mentioned that we've reduced those pollutants by 53%, but what you didn't, 63%, what you didn't add was that is in spite of the fact that we had a 153% increase in our economic activity. That's a major thing. In my introduction, I mentioned this thing that you did that no one could figure out how you did it. Involved a 100-year dispute between not just the state of Oklahoma and the city of Oklahoma City and the Choctaws and the Chickasaws. Do you want to share with us how you did that?
Well, you
know, they tried for 100 years, and you came in and did it in less than 100 days.
You know, less than 8 months into my administration as Attorney General, we were sued as a state by the Choctaw and Chickasaw Nation with respect to water in 17 counties in southeast Oklahoma. Many of you, if you know anything about water litigation, it generally takes decades to resolve water litigation. We were able to go from August of 2011 until 2016 and negotiate an historic water rights agreement with those 2 nations to provide certainty to those that are regulated, to provide a voice to the tribes with respect to water allocation and water quality. And the state has maintained its position as the arbiter of how those permits are allocated as well. So it was a partnership. It was the way things ought to work when litigation occurs, sitting across the table from individuals and working together to try to solve the problem. And, Senator, we were able to achieve that in record time, and I'm very proud of what we did as a state and as the Chickasaw and Choctaw Nation together.
Yeah, that's good. I think also you got them all in one room, didn't you?
Yes, sir.
That works. You've been criticized, and some of the people talking about some of your environmental record. I would like to be sure that people are aware of a number of people. I have some here that I'll submit for the record, but a guy named Ed Feit is the Vice President of Scenic Rivers and Water Quality of the GRDA. This is a person who has really been at the forefront of our Scenic Rivers program. He praises you, saying, I found that General Pruitt has always done the right by our scenic rivers. He's done everything constructive that he told me that he would do. The same thing comes from the North Carolina Department of Environmental Quality. Donald Van der Vaart, he wrote, Pruitt is committed to clean air and clean water and to restoring the EPA to its original mission of enforcing the environmental laws written by Congress. J.D. Strong, head of the Water Resources Board, he said, Attorney General Pruitt, and he goes on and praises you. I'd like to know why it is you have become such a hero of the scenic river people.
Well, Senator, as you know, Oklahoma has endured many decades of dispute with respect to phosphorus levels in the scenic Illinois River. In fact, there's been litigation that's been a part of that dispute for some time. There was actually a memorandum of understanding that Arkansas and Oklahoma entered into around 2002, 2003, and that memorandum expired during my time as Attorney General. There were many in government at the time that said we should just wait on the EPA to come in and address the issue. And I chose a different path. I actually reached out to my Democrat colleague, Dustin McDaniel, the Attorney General of the state of Arkansas, and we were able to negotiate an agreement that had phosphorus levels set at .037, scientifically driven, and enforced on both sides of the border for the first time in history. And so I think Mr. Feit, is actually the head of the Scenic Illinois Rivers Commission. He's been center on this issue for a number of years, and I think his good word relates to the work that we did in my office working with Dustin McDaniel to achieve that good outcome.
Yeah, I know my time has expired, but Mr. Chairman, I'd like to enter into the record at this point in the record the statement by the the DEQ that I referred to.
Without objection, hearing none, Senator Whitehouse.
Thanks, Chairman. Welcome to the committee, Mr. Pruitt. As we discussed when you and I met, the oceans off of our ocean state are warming due to fossil fuel-driven climate change. It is crashing our fisheries like lobster and winter flounder and making earning a living harder for our fishermen. I see nothing in your career to give those fishermen any confidence that you will care one bit for their well-being and not just the well-being of the fossil fuel industry. In a process that you could replicate in an Oklahoma high school science lab, excess carbon dioxide from fossil fuel emissions is turning our seas more acid. Rhode Island shell fishermen and shellfish growers are concerned. In my colleague Senator Merkley's state, they've already had oyster spat wiped out for businesses by acidified waters. I see nothing in your career that you would care at all about our Rhode Island shell fishermen. In Rhode Island, we have bad air days, and because of EPA's work, they are fewer and fewer. A bad air day is a day when people driving into work hear on the radio that ozone from out-of-state smokestacks has made the air in Rhode Island dangerous and that infants and the elderly and people with breathing difficulties should stay home on an otherwise beautiful day. Because those smokestacks are out of state, we need EPA to protect us, and I see nothing in your record that would give a mom taking her child to the hospital for an asthma attack any comfort that you would take the slightest interest in her. And your passion for devolving power down to states doesn't help us because our state regulators can't do anything about any of those problems. They all come from out-of-state sources. In this respect, we are very like Delaware. One of the things I'd like to ask you about here is the connection between you and some of these fossil fuel companies. These are some of the companies that have supported you. These are some of the political organizations that you've raised money for. You've raised money for them for Pruitt for Attorney General, correct?
Yes, sir. I have a campaign committee for that, yes.
And Devon Energy, Koch Industries, ExxonMobil have all maxed out to that account.
I'm not aware if they're maxed out or not, Senator, but I'm sure they've given to that committee.
Oklahoma Strong PAC is your leadership PAC?
It was, yes.
It was? And similarly, they gave money, they maxed out to that organization as well, which you control.
I'm unsure about that, Senator.
Okay. They contributed to it.
I'm even unsure about that as well. I haven't looked at that.
You closed your super PAC, Liberty 2.0, but that took fossil fuel contributions as well, correct?
That particular entity has been closed, yes.
Now, you helped raise money for the Republican Attorney General's Association. While you were a member of its executive committee, they received $530,000 from Koch Industries, $350,000 from Murray Energy, $160,000 from ExxonMobil, and $125,000 from Devon Energy, the company whose letter you transposed onto your letterhead and sent as an Oklahoma Attorney General document. Did you solicit, in your role at the Republican Attorney General's Association, any of that funding?
I'm unable to confirm if they gave those numbers, Senator, those amounts. There are
Did you
several members
solicit funding from them as in your role at the Republican Attorney General?
I attended fundraising events as an Attorney General, along with other Attorneys General, with respect to the RAGA.
And did you solicit? Did you ask them for money for RAGA?
As I indicated, I attended fundraising events with
But that's different. Attending a fundraising is one thing. Asking them is my question. Did you ask them for money?
I mean, specifically, you would have to ask about certain entities. I don't know.
Those are the entities. List. Koch Industries, Murray Energy, ExxonMobil, Devon Energy.
I did not ask of Koch or what were the other ones?
Murray Energy, ExxonMobil, Devon Energy.
I have not asked them for money on behalf of RAGA.
And then we have, you said to the chairman that there is nothing that might place you in a conflict of interest that you have not disclosed. Yet you founded the Rule of Law Defense Fund, which is a dark money operation that supports the Republican Attorney General's Association, and you have not disclosed any of your solicitations for that entity, nor have you disclosed what money was raised pursuant to those solicitations. This is an organization that appears to have a $1 million a year budget, so very substantial funds have been solicited. I believe you were its chairman. Will you disclose your role in soliciting money and in receiving money for the Rule of Law Defense Fund pursuant to your solicitation?
Senator, a point of clarification. I actually did not start nor initiate the Rule of Law Defense Fund. That is something I
You
did
led
not
it?
do. I've been an officer of that organization
Okay,
for
an officer of
2016.
it.
There's an executive staff, fundraisers that actually carry out the functions of that organization. There are many attorneys general that serve on that board. It's not a decision of one. It's a decision of those that have been empowered to make those decisions.
But you haven't told us anything about that. You haven't told us
I have
who
no
you
access to-
asked money
That's
from.
a
You haven't told us
501c4.
what they gave if you asked them. It's a complete black hole into which at least $1 million goes. And based on your record of fundraising, it appears that a great deal of your fundraising comes from these organizations who are in the energy sector and devoted to fighting climate change.
Some of whom I've actually sued as well, Senator. But with respect to the Rule of
Name
Law
one you've
Defense-
sued up there.
ExxonMobil.
Really?
Yes.
My time has expired. We'll pursue this in further questions.
Yeah, we're involved in, as I indicated, I think in your office, we are involved in, and Senator Inhofe mentioned it in his comments, a situation in Oklahoma where multiple oil and gas companies, ConocoPhillips and others, have defrauded the state in cleanup with respect to spills that have occurred in ExxonMobil.
Yeah, it's a quitam fraud case. It has nothing to do with the environment.
Senator, I would
I think we can reserve that
disagree.
for the second round.
Sure, I'm sorry.
Thank
He
you.
was coming back to me, so I was responding.
Thank you. Before heading to Senator Capito, there are two articles I'll be introducing into the record. One from the Wall Street Journal in September, headline, Hillary Clinton raises more than Donald Trump from oil industry. The second article that I'll be introducing for the record is from Politico from December 27th by Elena Shore, who quotes American Rising Executive Director Brian Rogers, quote, this is a partisan fishing expedition by 6 liberal Democrats who combined have taken more than $1.2 million from far-left environmentalist group dead set against any reforms to an out-of-control EPA. Senator Capito.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Attorney General Pruitt, for being here, for your willingness to throw your hat in the ring to serve. I'd like to quote the ranking member when he says it's hard work, because it is. The EPA is hard work. But one of the things you said really struck me, and I believe that the rule of law does matter, and I'm heartened by your passion for that. The regulatory overreach of the EPA has contributed to economic devastation in my state of West Virginia and in my region. Data from the Mine Safety and Health Administration shows that 60,000 coal jobs have been lost between 2011 and 2016. Thousands of these are in West Virginia. We're in a desperate situation in our state right now because of this. We had a field hearing in Beckley, West Virginia, where our WVU economist, John Deskins, said that the coal industry downturn had resulted in 6 of our southern West Virginia counties being in a Great Depression. For the past 8 years, the EPA has given no indication at all that it cares about the economic impact of its policies, even though Congress has said very clearly in the Clean Air Act and other environmental statutes that we expect jobs and economic factors to be taken into account. That's part of the law. In October, a federal court held that the EPA had failed to evaluate the job impacts of the EPA Clean Air Act as required by 321A of that act, and ordered the EPA to submit a schedule for conducting these the required jobs analysis. Incredibly, the EPA told the court it would take 2 years. This was just in the last several weeks. It would take 2 years just to come up with the plan on how to do the analysis, which, in my view, if that's part of the law that EPA is supposed to be following, they should already have the protocols set up to do an effective and accurate job analysis. So the court responded like this. This response is wholly inefficient, unacceptable, and unnecessary. It evidences the continued hostility on the part of the EPA to the acceptance of the mission established by Congress. So I would like to ask you to commit to me to ensure that the EPA will follow the law. It is charged with implementing and do those ongoing evaluation of job losses and economic shifts due to the requirements of the Act as required by the law.
Senator, as you indicated, I really believe that it's important that rule of law is adhered to because it inspires confidence in those that are regulated. I think oftentimes those that are regulated don't know what's expected of them. They look at a statute, they see the requirements of the statute, and then those that are regulating act in a way that's not consistent with that framework. And so they don't know what's expected of them, and that causes uncertainty and I think paralysis to a certain degree. So rule of law is something that we should take seriously. It's been at the heart of the litigation that we have initiated as a state. A lot of times these cases, as we were talking earlier with Senator Carper, there's a policy or a political kind of a tension that's drawn to it, but it really is about process and rule of law and making sure that the framework that this body, Congress, has established is respected and enforced. And so I appreciate your comments.
Well, in looking for the balance, we need to have at least a correct analysis of what the economic implications are of regulations. It is so important and critically important that we enforce our environmental laws and to keep our air clean and get it cleaner and protect our waters. In January of 2014, a storage tank in Charleston, West Virginia, was corrupted and went into the river. It was right by the water flow of the major water source in my community. 300,000 people had to do without water for several weeks. It caused a lot of angst economically to small businesses. Imagine a restaurant not being able to use water, or you can't, wash your clothes. You couldn't do anything with the water. But also, and I share this concern about the health and the long-range implications of what's happened. Several people, multiple individuals and Freedom Industries have pled guilty to environmental crimes in federal court, which I'm very pleased about. So let's talk about TSCA, because in TSCA I was able to support a provision that would say that if you're storing in close proximity to drinking water, you have to take that into consideration when you're reviewing potentially hazardous chemicals. Can we count on you to work with this committee to make sure that this bipartisan TSCA reform bill is fully implemented and efficiently and fully?
I'm absolutely, Senator. In fact, I would commend the work of this committee with Senator Inhofe's leadership in passing that update to the TSCA legislation. For the first time in history, as you know, the EPA has the ability to order testing to address chemicals that are going to be entered into the stream of commerce. And that's a very big substantive change that exists. There are many deadlines.
And I would also add that in TSCA, excuse me just a minute because I'm running out of time.
No.
In TSCA, we actually expanded the EPA's reach. So when you're asked if you're wanting to get rid of the EPA or it doesn't have a value, I voted to expand that reach of EPA to make sure that I have clean water, and then a spill happens in a community around this country, what's happened in Flint, Michigan, doesn't have the far-reaching implications that it does. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator.
Senator Cardin. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Pruitt, welcome to the committee. Thank you for your willingness to serve our country. I want to talk about the Chesapeake Bay program. We talked about that in my office. I explained to you, and I'll do it very quickly, that this is a program that was developed at the state level with the states that are in the watershed, including Delaware, with my colleague, Senator Carper. It's a state that the locals have determined how it's best to reach their pollution targets in order to help preserve the Chesapeake Bay. It's the largest estuary in the northern hemisphere. It's critically important. It's complicated. It doesn't flush itself as many bodies of water does. It has a reduction of oyster crops. There's so many problems. All the stakeholders have gotten together. They've worked out a plan. The federal government is part of that plan. It's enforced through the TMDL program, and it has been agreed to by the local governments. It was challenged, the TMDLs, including you joined that lawsuit. The Supreme Court refused to overturn the Court of Appeals supporting the use of the TMDLs. If you are confirmed, will you support the federal role in the Chesapeake Bay program as envisioned by the partners and stakeholders in enforcing the TMDLs if necessary?
Yes, Senator, and as I indicated in our office in our time, at the time that we had together, I really commend the 6 states that joined together to address the Chesapeake Bay and to try to set levels for both point source and non-point source type of discharge into the Chesapeake Bay. There were some concerns about the precedent, the role that EPA was playing initially, but through that litigation, the EPA has acknowledged that their role is more informational, and there was concern in Oklahoma about the Mississippi River Basin and the precedent that was set in that matter, and that's what spawned our litigation. But I really want to emphasize to you that process represents what should occur for states to join together and enter into an agreement to address water quality issues and then involve the EPA to serve the role it's supposed to serve is something that should be commended and celebrated. And as it relates to enforcing that TMDL, I can commit to you that, in fact, I will do so.
Part of the federal government's partnership is to provide resources. There are several programs that fund initiatives within the Chesapeake Bay watershed. Probably the largest is the state revolving funds dealing with wastewater. Will you support the federal government's partnership through funding these programs that are critically important to make the advancements in the Chesapeake Bay watershed?
Yes, Senator. I believe that the grant-making role of the EPA, as we talked about in your office, is very important to states across this country, whether it's the revolving funds or the WIFIA portions of our statutes, but grant-making in general is very important, and I would commit to you in that regard that I would do so with respect to the Chesapeake Bay.
I want to continue on clean water for one moment. We've had significant problems with safe drinking water and clean water. Let me ask you a preliminary question. Do you believe there is any safe level of lead that can be taken into the human body, particularly a young person?
Senator, that's something I've not reviewed nor know about. I would be very concerned about any level of lead going into the drinking water or obviously human consumption, but I've not looked at the scientific research on that.
The Clean Water Act provides for federal guidance as to acceptable clean water. It's enforced by the states. So my question to you in regards to clean water is, what steps will you take to make sure that our children are safe? We saw in Flint, Michigan, a tragedy occur. Where do you think the federal government needs to strengthen its regulatory roles to make sure that our children are safe from lead?
Well, I think with Flint, Michigan, it's an example of not a delay in response by the EPA. There should have been more done on corrosion control programs with the Flint, Michigan system, as you know, under the Clean Water Act and the Safe Drinking Water Act. If there's an emergency situation, the EPA can enter an emergency order to address those kinds of concerns. I think there should have been a more fast response, a more rapid response to Flint, Michigan. I think with respect to water quality, it is infrastructure. Water infrastructure is important. And as you indicated, the states play a very vital role in that process, and there needs to be more cooperation between the EPA and the states to ensure water quality is protected.
Just so I understand it, you have filed and participated in several lawsuits against the EPA's involvement, saying that the locals should have the responsibility. If you are confirmed, will you support federal enforcement, particularly in multi-state issues, where the only way we can get enforcement is at the federal level?
I believe that is a vital role of the EPA, as I've indicated in your office, with air quality, water quality, issues that cross state line. There is an enforcement mechanism that is important and would seek to do so if confirmed as EPA administrator.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator Cardin. Senator Fisher.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Pruitt, for being here today, but also for accepting the nomination. It is a service and a sacrifice, not just for you, but for your family as well, to step forward to serve this country. thank you, sir, for
Thank you, Senator.
being willing to do that. For your testimony, I do thank you. And I'd like to, first of all, let you know that Nebraskans, they've been really affected by the EPA in many instances, and I will give you some examples of that. Nebraska's public power utilities are grappling with how they could ever comply with the EPA's carbon emission reduction mandates. The city of Omaha is struggling with the agency's expensive CSO mandate and drinking water affordability. Nebraska farmers are waiting on new crop technology products that are stuck in a broken regulatory process. Our biofuel investors and producers are desperate for certainty under the RFS. Home builders, transportation stakeholders, and local county officials are concerned about the jurisdictional expansion to control our state's water resources. Communities and small business owners fear that the EPA's ozone mandate will stunt potential economic development and growth in our state. As a result of the activist role the EPA has played for the past 8 years, families are concerned about the futures of their livelihood. We all want clean air, and we all want clean water. That is one point that I know each and every person here agrees on. But with the EPA's tremendous impact on Americans' lives each and every day, it is important that the agency be open, transparent, and answerable for its actions. Given these concerns, along with the many others that have been and will continue to be discussed today, what steps will you take as the EPA administrator to provide relief for American families that are faced truly with an onslaught of EPA rules?
Senator, you mentioned open, transparent rulemaking. There are concerns that have been expressed recently with respect to regulation through litigation, where groups initiate litigation against the EPA and the United States government and set environmental policy through something called a sue and settle process. I think this body, as well as the U.S. House, have looked at those kinds of issues. And when we talk about open transparency, there's a reason why the Administrative Procedures Act exists. It is intended to provide notice to those that are going to be impacted with rules, to give them the opportunity to offer comment, and to inform the regulators on the impact of those rules. And then it's the obligation of the regulator to take those things into consideration in finalizing rules. Otherwise, they act in an arbitrary and capricious way. And so it's very important that that process be adhered to give voice to all Americans in balancing the environmental objectives we have, but also the economic harm that results. And the Supreme Court has spoke about that rather consistently of late, and I would seek to lead the EPA in such a way to ensure that openness and transparency.
You know, a couple weeks ago, we had I felt a very good conversation about our shared vision for the EPA to bring common sense and accountability back to that agency. And I think that's going to go a long way in restoring confidence in the agency by the American people. One issue we did discuss was the renewable fuel standard and its importance to my home state of Nebraska. We are the largest ethanol producer west of the Missouri River. Our neighbors to the east, Senator Ernst's home state, they do lead the nation in ethanol production. So honoring the congressionally mandated timelines and the volume requirements that are critical from an investment point of view and also from a planning perspective, I think that this is especially relevant, and especially during the current farm crisis that we are seeing and the negative impact on people in agriculture all across this nation. In our meeting, you did express your commitment to me to honor the law, and you echoed President-elect Trump's support for the statute itself and a strong RVO. And for the record, can you please once again express your commitment to uphold the congressional intent of the RFS?
Yes, Senator, and you said it well, to honor the intent and the expression of the Renewable Fuel Standard statute is very, very important. It's not the job of the administrator of the EPA to do anything other than administer the program according to the intent of Congress, and I commit to you to do so.
And you
and
also,
the waiver, and I would say this, the waivers that routinely are offered by the administrator. Recently, another waiver was offered. It should be used judiciously. There's a reason why Congress put in that statute those statutory objectives. The market has changed since 2005, and the waiver authority that's been provided by this body is important, but that waiver authority should be used judiciously, and the act should be complied with and enforced consistent with the will of Congress.
Thank you, sir, and I would ask that you also tell us publicly what you told us, that you will honor the timelines on the volume levels that are mandated by Congress as well.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator Fisher. Senator Merkley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Over a number of years, information started pouring into EPA that the estimate of the amount of fugitive methane escaping in gas and oil drilling been deeply underestimated. In 2011, the EPA put out its best estimates based on the information that was being presented. And this is relevant because methane is a global warming gas, more potent than CO2. Gas companies didn't like this because, well, it presented a vision of natural gas being more damaging environmentally than folks had previously understood. Devon Energy is one of the groups that sought to cast doubt on this scientific information, and they came to you to be their spokesperson, and they asked, will you be our mouthpiece in casting doubt and send a letter we have drafted to the EPA? And you sent that letter. And I just want to ask, first, are you aware that methane is approximately 30 times more potent than carbon dioxide as a global warming gas?
I am, Senator.
Thank
the
you.
impact on human health.
That's the answer. Yes, thank you. So yes, no question. And on a 1 to 10 scale, how concerned are you about the impacts of fugitive methane in driving global warming?
Methane, as you indicated, has
1 to 10 scale, highly, 10, very, very concerned, or 1, not so concerned?
The quantities of methane in the atmosphere compared to CO2 is less, but it's far more potent, and it is.
Are you concerned? I'm asking about your level of concern.
Yes.
Highly concerned?
I'm concerned.
Thank you. Do you acknowledge sending this letter to the EPA in October 2011?
Senator, that is a letter that's on my letterhead that was sent to the EPA, yes, with respect to the
issue. You acknowledge that 97% of the words in that letter came directly from Devon Energy?
I've not looked at the percentages, Senator.
The statement that's been analyzed many times is that all of the 1,016 words, except for 37 words, were written directly by Devon Energy.
Senator, that was a step that was taken as Attorney General representing the interest of our state. Over 25%.
Yes, so I didn't ask that question. I was just asking if you copied the letter virtually word for word. You've acknowledged that, yes, it's in the record. People can count it. It's correct. All right. So a public office is about serving the public. There is a public concern over the impact of methane on global warming. There is scientific research showing that it's far more devastating than anticipated and far more is leaking than, but you used your office as a direct extension of an oil company rather than a direct extension of the interests of the public health of the people of Oklahoma. Do you acknowledge that you presented a private oil company's position rather than a position developed by the people of Oklahoma?
Senator, with respect, I disagree. The efforts that I took as Attorney General were representing the interest of the state of Oklahoma.
Earlier you said excuse me, I'm asking the questions. You said earlier you listened to everyone. In drafting this letter, you took an oil company's position, and then without consulting people who had diverse views about the impact, you sent it off. How can you present that as representing the people of Oklahoma when you simply only consulted an oil company to push its own point of view for its private profit?
Senator, there's an obligation the EPA has to follow processes as established by this body. The cost-benefit analysis under Section 112 is something that they have to engage in. There was a concern about the overestimated percentages that the EPA put in the record. It was a record-based challenge. That was the expression of the letter to the EPA, and it was representing the interest of an industry in the state of Oklahoma, not a company, an industry.
So my question was, what other groups, environmental groups or other groups did you consult so that you had that full perspective before representing simply a for-profit oil company using your official office and your official letterhead?
I consulted with other environmental officials in Oklahoma that regulate that industry and learn from them with respect to the concerns about the estimates that were provided by the EPA.
Can you provide this committee with information showing who you consulted in representing this letter specifically for Devon Energy? Because the information that's in the public realm only shows that they simply sent you a letter, asked you to send it, and you sent it without questions.
We have 7 or so individuals in our office that are involved in these kinds of issues, and we will collect the information they have and provide it to this body pursuant to the chairman's direction.
Your staff expanded substantially while you were in charge to 251 staff members. Why do you need an outside oil company to draft a letter when you have 250 people working for you?
Senator, as I've indicated, that was an effort that was protecting the state's interest and making sure that we made the voices of all Oklahomans heard on a very important industry to our state.
You said all heard, but you only sent it on behalf of a single voice, the oil company. Thank you.
I still have some time remaining for my questioning. Is there anything you'd like to add that you haven't felt you've had a chance in terms of answering fully some of the areas of the questioning?
I think, Senator, the clarification that the letter that was sent to the EPA was not sent on behalf of any one company. This was not particular to Devon Energy, not particular to Chesapeake, not particular to other companies in our state. It was particular to an industry. The state of Oklahoma has an oil and gas industry that is vibrant to our state, as you might imagine, just like many of you have industry in your state. There was concern expressed by that industry, many folks in that industry, about the overestimating that occurred with that methane rule. That was the communication to the EPA. It was a position of the state, not the position of any one company.
Thank you. Senator Moran.
Chairman, thank you very much. General Pruitt, welcome to the committee. Thank you for your public service. I'm going to see if I can get through 3 areas in the 5 minutes that I have. First of all, WOTUS, Waters of the United States. Despite there being an injunction against the enforcement of the WOTUS rule, I'm told that EPA Region 7, the region in which Kansas is part, those regional inspectors have increased their inspection of smaller animal feeding operations. Unlike many states, Kansas has a well-established state permit system for small facilities, as well as the delegated authority under the Clean Water Act. Rather than coordinate, the EPA, rather than coordinating with the state agency, the EPA is engaged in its own inspections and its own enforcement on these small facilities, often conflicting with state permitting and the enforcement process. In these actions, the EPA has claimed jurisdiction over features like grass waterways, culverts under county roads, unconnected to the feeding operation, and not situated in or near any body of water. General Pruitt, what would your direction be to the EPA staff, to Region 7 and others, in regard to their actions enforcing WOTUS while an injunction is in place?
Well, Senator, as you indicated, and I do want to acknowledge the same concerns have been expressed by those individuals in Oklahoma and different groups with respect to the WOTUS definition that has been offered by the EPA that is subject to a 31-state challenge that was consolidated there before the Sixth Circuit. And as you indicated, there has been a stay of enforcement against that particular rule. The Supreme Court actually last Friday took up a matter of jurisdiction on that case, so that adds some complexity to this. But I think the role of the EPA prospectively is to seek to provide clarity on what the true definition, what the best definition is with respect to waters in the United States. As you know, there's much flexibility and discretion there given to the EPA, and a series of cases that lead up to the Rapanos decision that haven't provided a tremendous amount of clarity. The best thing the EPA can do going forward is to reestablish that clarity so that states and individuals know what's expected of them in compliance.
General, thank you. I don't think I need to remind you in particular about the role that states play in clean water, but I would take a moment to highlight something that is often, I think, forgotten in the regulatory world of water quality, is the Department of Agriculture, the Natural Resource Conservation Service, in which landowners are assisted through the Department of Agriculture in improving water quality and water quantity in a very partnership-oriented local effort that is significantly different than the tremendous reach from the EPA in Washington, D.C. as compared to the local efforts by landowners themselves to work with USDA to solve problems. Let me move to my second question. It revolves the Flint Hills. That's a native grassland in our state. The owners of those grasslands, these are thousands of acres of grass, they burn the prairie in the early spring for purposes of regeneration of that grass. It is learned from the Indians that lightning used to be the method by which that grassland burned, less so now with the settlement that have occurred of our country. And as a result of that annual burning that is ecologically desirable, there is times in which a city, even one of our own, Wichita, for example, is no longer a non-attainment under the Clean Air Act. And I raise this issue to you in asking that you work, if you are confirmed, you work with the state of Kansas in our local efforts to manage the burning of the national grasslands in a way that is advantageous to wildlife habitat, at the same time is done in a timely fashion at appropriate times in appropriate amounts that preserves the air quality, but again, not a heavy-handed approach that one-size solution or a ban fits the circumstance.
If confirmed, Senator, I look forward to working with you on that issue.
I thank you for that. And finally, I want to highlight a small town in Kansas named Pretty Prairie, a typical name or a perfect name for a town in our state. Pretty Prairie, Kansas is a population of about 700 people. For several decades, because of the need because of high nitrates in the city's water levels, I didn't say that very well, because of high levels of nitrate in the city water system, the city has provided free bottled water to its citizens. And my question to you is, now the EPA is disallowing that practice and requiring the city to spend approximately $2.4 million and raise the rates of our residents of that community by $80 a month, while the community seemingly is satisfied with the solution of the city providing an alternative to the expense of a new water treatment plant. I ask this question as an example of where a rigid decision as compared to a community-based decision seems to prevail at the EPA, and would give you an opportunity to confirm to me what I hope you would say is that you will work with communities. You as an Oklahoman, me as a Kansan, and many of the members of this committee represent lots of communities in which the population is insufficient to be able to pay for the costs of water or sewer treatment. We need financial resources to accomplish that, but we also need common sense solutions. solutions to the problem.
Senator, I look forward to working with you on that issue as well as the other. There's a saying in the environmental space, national standards, neighborhood solutions. And I think it's important for the EPA administrator, those in Washington, to learn, as I said in my opening statement, to listen and learn from you, with respect to the needs of your community and your state, and collaborate with you and the local officials to achieve good outcomes.
I look forward to educating you on behalf of Kansans.
Yeah, thank you, Senator. Senator Booker.
Good morning, Mr. Pruitt.
Good morning, Senator Booker.
I have a letter that I read that you sent to the committee last year, and you said that the Oklahoma Attorney General, you said, I am responsible for protecting the welfare of Oklahoma citizens. I assume that's still correct, and you believe that?
Yes, Senator.
And during the past 6 years in pursuit of that, if you look at the record of the lawsuits you filed against the EPA, you've joined or filed 14 lawsuits against the EPA challenging clean air and clean water rules, yes?
We've been involved in multiple pieces of litigation, Senator.
Yeah, but I'm looking at specifically 14, and Mr. Chairman, I'd like to put those 14 lawsuits into the record of where you specifically challenged the EPA on air quality. And let me just go through some of those.
Without objection.
Thank you, sir. To refresh your recollection, you filed 2 lawsuits challenging the EPA mercury and air toxics standards. You filed a lawsuit challenging the EPA's 2015 National Ambient Air Quality Standards for ozone. You filed 4 lawsuits challenging the EPA's Clean Power Plan. You have sued to challenge the EPA's 111B standards for carbon dioxide emissions from new power plants. And you also sued to challenge the EPA's federal implementation plan for Oklahoma under the regional haze rule. You're familiar with those, I imagine.
Yes, Senator.
And you filed a lawsuit challenging the EPA cross-state air pollution rule, something in New Jersey we're very concerned with. And are you aware that that rule, which you lost in that suit, scientists estimate that that alone prevents 400,000 asthma attacks nationally each year? Are you aware of those estimations?
Yes, Your Honor. Yes, Senator. May I offer?
I appreciate your promotion to being a judge. Let me continue, Mr. Pruitt. I don't have much time.
Okay.
So each of these lawsuits that I just went through and that we analyzed, all of them challenge attempts by the EPA to reduce air pollution. In all of them except one, you filed those lawsuits joining with polluting companies that were also suing the EPA. And so in addition to filing those lawsuits with some of the polluting companies, or at least one that has now been specifically mentioned by two of my colleagues, you used substantial portions of the letters from those companies, put them on your official Attorney General letterhead. And what was sort of surprising to me is that when you've been asked about this in the public, you basically represented that that's actually called representative government in my view of the world. Your testimony here says that you were representing industry, you were representing the polluters. And so with all of these lawsuits you filed and with all of these letters like this one written to the EPA on behalf of the industries that are causing the pollution, it seems clear to me that obviously the fact pattern on representing polluters is clear, that you've worked very hard on behalf of these industries that have their profits externalized, negative externalities are their pollution. And so I just have a question for you specifically about the children of Oklahoma. Do you know how many kids in Oklahoma roughly have asthma?
I do not, Senator.
Well, according the data published by the very nonpartisan group, the American Lung Association, more than 111,000 children in Oklahoma, which is more than 10%, more than 1 in 10 of all the kids in Oklahoma have asthma. That's one of the highest asthma rates in the entire United States of America. Now, this is a crisis, similar data for where I was mayor, and I can tell you firsthand the devastating impacts that kids with asthma,
to assess damages against certain states that were in excess of their allocated share. So each of those cases, I would ask you to remember, I'm an advocate in behalf of the state of Oklahoma. There's a state's interest, as Senator Rounds indicated, that has to be in play. To say that any of those cases is about any one company is just simply not right. There's no parens patria standing that I have as Attorney General to bring a case on behalf of a private citizen or a company. There has to be a standing injury to the state's interest to bring those cases. And so I would ask you to consider that as we go through those cases that you mentioned earlier.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, and thank you, sir, for your response, your complete response. Also, as the chairman of the subcommittee on oversight of the Environmental Protection Agency, I've had the opportunity to look at their basis, or the way that they make their decisions known, and the logic they use in getting to those decisions. We had a chance to talk about it in my office the other day, and one of the items that I brought up was the fact that we actually had received comments from the Small Business Administration Office of Advocacy, a copy of which I've gotten, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to have put into the record. Thank you. And with this was a letter that was sent to the EPA in October of 2014 requesting that the EPA withdraw the proposed Waters of the U.S. rule, the WOTUS rule, and reevaluate the impacts the rule would have on American small business. Now, this is a federal agency requesting the EPA take a second look at a proposed rule. The EPA refused this request and issued the final rule that we have today. What are your thoughts on this? And would you, if you are approved and become the next administrator of the EPA, would you take a second look at whether or not they had a valid reason for having the Waters of the U.S. rule considered again?
I think, Senator, the response of the Sixth Circuit and where we are presently with the litigation, there's definitely a need to address that on a prospective basis. Historically, as you know, under the Clean Water Act, and even before the Clean Water was passed, the waters in the United States equaled navigable waters, navigable in fact waters. We know from a couple of cases that led up to the most recent case, Rapanos, that the Clean Water Act, it's something more than navigable in fact, but what that more is has to be determined and assessed. And so, as I indicated earlier to another senator's question, the most important thing is to provide certainty, to make sure that the Clean Water Act helps those at the state level know where the boundaries are of where they have jurisdiction and where they don't, so that we can have regulations that are fair, equitable, and uncertainty is not created.
In the lawsuits that you brought against the Environmental Protection Agency on behalf of the state of Oklahoma, would it be fair to say that a number of those are based upon the Environmental Protection Agency failing to follow its own rules in the promulgation of those rules?
Yes, Senator. I think whether it's the MATS case or the Clean Power Plan case or the WOTUS case or a multitude of cases, the courts have agreed that the EPA has exceeded its authority, that the EPA has not acted within the framework that Congress has established in performing the role that it's supposed to perform. And that's the reason I mentioned in my opening statement that process matters, rule of law matters, federalism matters. And those issues matter because Congress has said so. It is Congress who gives authority to the EPA. The EPA is an administrative agency, is not a legislative body. And so it's important for that agency to act within the framework, within the substantive authority that Congress has provided it in doing its job. In leading the EPA, if confirmed, I think if I do that effectively, it will provide confidence, certainty to those that are regulated, to know what's expected of them, and improve our air and improve our water because of that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Rounds. Senator Markey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This morning, NOAA, NASA has declared 2016 the hottest year in the 137-year-old record that has been kept. Donald Trump has called global warming a hoax caused by the Chinese. Do you agree that global warming is a hoax?
I do not, Senator.
So Donald Trump is wrong?
I do not believe that climate change is a hoax.
Okay. That's important for the President to hear. Mr. Pruitt, you've made a career working on behalf of the fossil fuel industry to eviscerate regulations designed to protect public health and the environment. You have sued the EPA 19 times to stop clean air and water protections. 8 of those cases are still ongoing, including your litigation that challenges critical rules that reduce levels of hazardous smog, mercury, and carbon pollution. As EPA administrator, you would be in a position to serve as plaintiff, defendant, judge, and jury on these ongoing 8 lawsuits, and that would be wrong. In your ethics agreement, you have said that you would not participate in any matter that is ongoing litigation within 1 year. But Mr. Pruitt, isn't it correct that these lawsuits may very well continue for much longer than 1 year?
Well, Senator, I have the letter from the Ethics Council at the EPA, and the 1-year time period is intended to address covered entities, entities that I served in a chairmanship or a officer capacity, the Southern Theological Seminary, the Windows Ministry. Those entities are covered entities. So if there is a matter that arises before the EPA within a 1-year period, a particular matter, a specific case that involves those entities, then the recusal would be in order. But that's really the focus of the 1-year timeline.
Will you agree to recuse yourself from those lawsuits which you brought as the Attorney General of Oklahoma against the EPA, not just for 1 year, but for the entirety of the time that you are the administrator of the EPA? Will you commit to doing that?
Senator, for clarity, I think that it's important to note that the 1-year time period, again, is for those covered entities that were highlighted in the EPA letter. With respect to pending litigation, the EPA Ethics Council has indicated with respect to particular matters and specific parties, there will be an opportunity to get counsel from the EPA at that point to determine what steps could be taken to avoid appearances of impropriety.
So you will not are you saying that you will not recuse yourself from the actual matters which you're suing the EPA on right now as Attorney General of Oklahoma for the time that you are the head of the EPA?
I'm not saying that at all, Senator.
You are saying that. Will you recuse yourself?
I'm saying that the EPA Ethics Council has indicated those cases will require a review by the EPA Ethics Council, and if it involves a particular matter with a specific party, then recusal would potentially be in order, and I would follow the guidance and counsel of
I just
EPA
think this is a clear line for the American public, given your record from Oklahoma in suing the EPA on all of these matters, that if you don't agree to recuse yourself, then again, you become plaintiff, defendant, judge, and jury on the cases that you're bringing that right now as Attorney General of Oklahoma against the EPA. And that the EPA is for all of the people of the United States, not just the fossil fuel industry of Oklahoma. So you're not committing, and I think that's a big mistake, Mr. Pruitt, to recuse yourself from those cases. It is critical. And moreover, you also are in a position to initiate regulations that could overturn smog protections, carbon pollution protections that are right now on the books that you are suing as Attorney General of Oklahoma to overturn. Would you commit to not promulgating new regulations in any of the areas where you right now are suing the EPA? Would you make a commitment that you would recuse yourself from doing that?
Let me be clear, Senator, because we talked about this in your office and very much enjoyed the conversation we had there in addition to this area that we talked about. I have every willingness and desire to recuse as directed by EPA Ethics Council. And if directed to do so, I will in fact do so, to recuse in those cases. There is a difference, as you know, between pending litigation, a particular matter, with specific parties, and prospective rulemaking. Rulemaking goes through a process.
Look, what the American people are expecting here is the EPA doesn't turn into every polluter's ally. The only way to ensure that is for you to recuse yourself from the cases that you have brought, because most of them are to overturn the clean air, clean water, smog regulations. So to create an appearance of independence, it's critical that you recuse yourself.
And I will recuse, Senator.
Otherwise, honestly, people are going to think that it's not just the fox guarding the hen house, it's the fox destroying the hen house. And because you haven't distanced yourself from the actual litigation that you have initiated on most of the key issues that you are now going to have responsibility for protecting in terms of the public health of the entire country.
And Senator, I can say to you unequivocally, I will recuse as directed by EPA Ethics Council.
And I'm saying to you is that you should just start out saying, I'm going to recuse myself from anything that relates to any litigation that I have initiated as the Attorney General of Oklahoma that questions the clean air, clean water, climate change, or smog, or mercury protections, which are right now on the books that the EPA is honored to protect. And if you don't do that, then we're going to have a fundamental conflict of interest that is presented by your presence as the administrator of the EPA. It just gets down to being a matter as simple as that.
The Senator's time has expired. Thank you, Senator Markey. For clarification, will you fully follow the advice of the EPA Ethics Council?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Just for an additional clarification regarding conflicts of interest, I note the letter to this committee on January 4th, and I'm submitting to the record, this is the Office of Government Ethics, believe that this nominee is in compliance with applicable laws and regulations governing conflicts of interest. And then there was a letter yesterday from Walter Schaub, Director, Office of Government Ethics, responding to a letter from Senator Carper and other EPW Democrats regarding Attorney General Pruitt and potential conflicts of interest. And they say, if the Office of Government Ethics has transmitted a certified financial disclosure report and an ethics agreement to the Senate, which they have, it means the Office of Government Ethics is satisfied that all financial conflicts of interest have been identified and resolved. Senator Ernst.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Attorney General Pruitt, for appearing in front of us today. I enjoyed our conversation, both one-on-one and then in a group setting as well. And I would like to go back and revisit our discussion on the RFS. As you know, Iowa is home to 43 ethanol refineries. We are the largest producer of ethanol west or east of the Missouri River. President-elect Trump reiterated his support for biofuels while he was campaigning across Iowa and all across the Midwest. And those areas of the country overwhelmingly supported his candidacy and led to his victory. And thank you for stating once again that you would honor his commitment to biofuels by carrying out the RFS as intended by Congress. Policy certainty is key for economic growth, and this is something that we discussed in my office. Unfortunately, as a result of uncertainty surrounding the EPA's renewable fuel volume targets in 2014, 2015, and 2016, second-generation biofuel investment decreased and proposed projects moved overseas. Fortunately, the EPA has recently changed its course and released updated volume targets for the RFS that meet the levels prescribed by Congress. If confirmed as administrator, what will you do to continue to provide certainty so that investment can continue to happen right here at home in the United States?
You know, Senator, as you indicated in our meeting, the importance of the infrastructure, the investment that has occurred in reliance upon the law was passed in 2005 and updated in 2007. And as I indicated earlier to Senator Fisher's question, the latitude discretion that has been given to the EPA administrator with respect to waiving those statutory targets should be judiciously used. It shouldn't be automatic. It should be something that the EPA administrator seeks to comply with and adhere to because of the will of this body. And so I think those waivers obviously are in order, but with respect to market conditions, we have less consumption today, more fuel-efficient vehicles. Market conditions have changed since 2005, but despite that, the EPA administrator should not use that to undermine or to somehow put into question the commitments made by this body in the Renewable Fuel Standards statute.
Thank you for your commitment to the RFS and the intention of Congress. I also want to touch on an issue you mentioned in your testimony, which is the level of fear and distrust many folks have of the EPA. When I'm home in Iowa, I host town halls all across the state and just want to hear what's going on in their communities. And what I hear without fail at these town halls is that folks are frustrated with the EPA and the gotcha mentality that has stemmed from the agency. My constituents tell me the EPA is out to get them rather than work with them, and there is a huge lack of trust between many of my constituents and the EPA. And if we take a look specifically at the WOTUS rule, Iowans truly feel that the EPA ignored their comments and concerns, threw them under the rug, and then just moved forward. We know now that the EPA relied on gimmicky mass emails and social media events to prop up their message, and then they used those tactics to insinuate that anyone who had reasonable concerns about the WOTUS rule are somehow in favor of dirty water, which is absolutely ridiculous. And this type of culture that was created under the Obama administration has no place here. So, Mr. Pruitt, what do you plan to do in your first days as the administrator to improve the relationships EPA has with the hardworking folks across the country?
Well, Senator, as I indicated in my opening statement, this paradigm that we live within today, that if you're pro-energy, you're anti-environment, if you're pro-environment, you're anti-energy, is something that I think is just a false narrative. We can do better than that. In fact, this country has shown for decades that we can grow our economy and be a good steward of our air, land, and water, and we need to get back to that. Cooperative federalism is at the heart of many of the environmental statutes that have been passed by this body. And the reason for that is it's the states, many times, that have the resources, the expertise, and understanding what the unique challenges are for the environment and improving our water and our air. It's not that they don't care about it. Senator Whitehouse indicated a devolution of authority to the states would create a problem. That's not what I'm advocating, and I think we hear in the marketplace we need a partnership, a true partnership between the EPA in performing its role along with the states in performing theirs. And if we have that partnership as opposed to punishment, as opposed to uncertainty and duress that we currently see in the marketplace, I think we'll have better air, better water quality as a result.
Thank you. I look forward to that partnership and transparency. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Duckworth.
Thank you. Mr. Pruitt, I want to clarify your response to Senator Ernst on this whole congressional intent when it comes to the RFS. What I want to know, and what the people of Illinois, we are also a great producer of ethanol. What we need to know is where exactly you stand on the RFS. Are you the Attorney General who only 3 years ago sided with Big Oil to slam the RFS? You, and I quote, said that RFS was unworkable and also that it was a flawed program. So I'm a little confused on what you're saying today, because are you that Mr. Pruitt, or are you the Scott Pruitt today who's saying all the right things in this confirmation hearing and in these meetings to try to reassure pro-RFS states by repeating nice-sounding but ultimately vague and hollow mantra that if confirmed, you would enforce the RFS law as written by Congress? As you and I are quite well aware of, such a statement essentially dodges the critical issue for biofuels producers and workers, because under the law, the EPA has considerable discretion to adjust the renewable volume obligation in a manner that you would argue is contrary to congressional intent. yet may be compliant with the explicit letter of the statute. So as EPA administrator, you could still technically be in compliance with Congress, with the law, but actually be working against it. And your answers today have not clarified that. So my question to you, Mr. Pruitt, is this. Which specific actions has EPA taken since 2007 while administering the RFS that you, in your view, are not consistent with congressional intent? Can you name any?
Thank you, Senator. The administrator and the EPA routinely misses the statutory targets and publishing those each year, creating great uncertainty in the marketplace. In fact, in some years they've missed the timeline as far as submitting those targets by over a year. In some cases, over 2 years.
Okay, so let me ask you this then: yes or no? Do you believe that Congress intended for the RFS to increase the amount of renewable fuel blended in our nation's liquid transportation fuel supply? Yes or no?
Without question.
Without question.
Yes.
All right. My second question then is yes or no, do you believe Congress intended for the RFS to be a stable policy that drives private investment in the renewable energy industry?
Yes.
And finally, if confirmed, will you commit to opposing any and all proposals to move the point of obligation under the RFS program from refiners to blenders?
Senator, as you know, the EPA is actually involved in a comment period on that very issue, and to prejudge the outcome of that, I think would be, I would not be able to do that. There are many aspects of the program, from the trading program, the monitoring of fraud in the system, that need to be better administrated by the EPA. These have been administration issues. The EPA has created uncertainty. We talked about a minute ago with the Senator about the amount of investment that's gone into the infrastructure because of the 2005 law. Those individuals need to have certainty and confidence that the RFS is going to be enforced and administered pursuant to the desires of Congress.
Right, but if you were to do that, then you would actually have to answer, yes, because to move the RFS program from refiners to blenders is actually one of those ways that you can actually undermine the RFS standards as intended by Congress, which you yourself just now said was intended to increase the amount of biofuels blended into the fuel supply of the United States. This is my problem. On the one hand, your entire track record shows you to be someone who opposes the RFS, and yet here in front of Congress and in meetings with senators, you are giving these vague answers that sound right when it comes to the RFS, but really opens all sorts of back doors for you to oppose the renewable fuel standard. And that is very troublesome because all across the Midwest, you know, for those of us who have fought to strengthen national security by lessening our country's dangerous dependence on foreign oil, I'm really incredibly concerned about the future of the RFS and American-produced biofuels under a Scott Pruitt-led EPA. And I'm also incredibly concerned about what you're going to do in terms of protecting the environment. In your answer to one of my colleagues about what the role of the EPA is, what is the job of the EPA, one of the first questions you got, you spent 5 minutes talking before you actually said, protect the environment. You talked all about reducing EPA's influence over states for a good 5 minutes before you actually got to the environment. And then for my farmers, my corn and soybean producers, for my biofuel industry, the RFS is critical in order to continue that. And I would rather burn American-made, American-grown corn and soybean in my gas tank than I would oil from the Middle East. I've already been to a war fought over oil in the Middle East, and I don't intend to allow us to continue to do that, which is why the RFS is so critical, not just for the jobs in Illinois, not just to support our Illinois agriculture, but for our national security when it comes to where we're going to get our energy supply. I'm out of time. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Duckworth.
If I may, Senator, let me say to you, the role of the administrator of the EPA is to enforce and administer the RFS program to carry out the objectives of that statute. Those targets that have been put in that statute by this body need to be respected. The discretion authority, the waiver authority of the administrator needs to be judiciously used to address those concerns that we've talked about. And so I don't want you to have any concern about the intent, objective, or will, if confirmed, of carrying out the RFS mandate or the statute in whole.
That very answer concerns me because you've not actually said that you're going to stick with it.
I'd like to submit for the record, one, a letter from the American Farm Bureau Federation, which strongly supports the nomination of Scott Pruitt as administrator of the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency and urges a vote in favor of his confirmation. The second is a letter from the Democrat Attorney General of the state of Arkansas, former Democrat Attorney General Dustin McDaniel, who has this to say about Attorney General Scott Pruitt's work on the stem phosphorus levels in the Illinois River watershed. He said, recent press accounts regarding these efforts unfairly mischaracterized the work that was done by General Pruitt and his team. He was a staunch defender of sound science and good policy as appropriate tools to protect the environment of his state. I saw firsthand how General Pruitt was able to bridge political divides and manage multiple agency agendas to reach an outcome that was heralded by most credible observers as both positive and historic. Senator Bozeman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Attorney General Pruitt, for your willingness to serve and your family. I think everybody at the dais here realizes that these really are family affairs that truly affect everyone. In recent years, EPA has made it increasingly difficult for Arkansas to manage its delegated National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System. Too often, the permits, rulemakings, or other actions sent to EPA for review are returned with demands far more restrictive. Additional expensive data collection is required, and other costly onerous requirements. New leadership at EPA has an opportunity to correct this coercive federalism and instead restore cooperative federalism as intended. The states have the expertise and local knowledge necessary to administer environmental programs. Mr. Pruitt, EPA has the opportunity to play a significant role in supporting a move back to cooperative federalism. Can you please explain how you plan to change the EPA state dynamic? My experience with EPA and being on transportation in the House, being ranking member on water there, ranking member in the Senate is, the EPA their attitude is, we're with you unless you come out with a finding that is contrary, and then we're going to do it our way. So can you address that?
I think two things, Senator. One, as we indicated earlier, rule of law and making sure that the authority granted to the states under state implementation plans, delegation under certain clean water provisions, that's respected. But also, I think the EPA needs to provide more assistance to the states in working in partnership and be proactive. Those regional administrators that we have across the country need to be seen as partners and not adversaries. And so I think restoring that confidence, restoring that relationship, and seeking to do so is very, very important at carrying out this partnership that we know that exists under the various environmental statutes.
Very good. For the past 8 years, EPA has acted as a political arm of the Obama administration time and time again. We've seen rules developed not based on sound science, but on political ideology. When rules have been released, states and private sector and even Congress have had trouble getting EPA to show the science that helped develop these rules. Under your leadership, can we expect EPA to be more transparent? In other words, how the rules have been developed, the science behind them. And you've continued alluded to this, and I think it's so important. As administrator of the EPA, can we count on you to base all of your decisions on the rule of law, not on the administrators or even your own political ideology?
Absolutely, Senator, in response to the latter part of your question, but public participation is important. There's a reason why in rulemaking that you take comment. There's a reason, as I indicated earlier to Senator Ernst, that you involve those that are impacted by rulemaking, because you want to understand the impact, both economically and otherwise, in the benefit of the environment, as well as making sure that you craft rules and regulations that take all those things into consideration. So hearing the voices of all Americans in that rulemaking process, responding to those comments in the record before rules are finalized, transparency, objectivity, a commitment to process is very important, in my view, of restoring the confidence of the American people in the rulemaking processes that occur here in Washington, D.C.
So again, releasing the scientific data behind that would be something that you'd very much support.
Yes, Senator.
Very much. A problem that the EPW committee is faced with the current administration is a lack of communication. Time and time again, EPA either did not respond to questions from committee members, or at the very least took months to respond. Under your leadership, can we expect EPA to get committee members' answers in a timely fashion?
Yes, Senator. As I indicated in my opening statement, listening is an important role of leadership, and listening to the voices of folks here in Congress. As I went through and met with many of you through this process, there were issues particular to your state that you made me aware of, and I, if confirmed, as EPA Administrator, seek to be very active in listening to the needs with respect to your various states and respond to this body with respect to questions.
Let me just comment on the Arkansas-Oklahoma issue. I was the congressman in that district, and so I inherited that in 2001. I've been working on this for 15 years. And I appreciate you and Attorney General McDaniel doing a very good job of getting things done. On the other hand, the idea that somehow you were soft, in fact, I would argue that the agreement that was reached was way too restrictive and is probably one of the most restrictive watersheds as far as phosphorus requirements of any place in the United States.
Well, as you know, Senator, in that process, we actually selected a biologist from Baylor University to engage in a scientific study on what the phosphorus level should be, the numeric quality of the water, and it was determined at the end of that process that .037 was the right standard and is now enforceable on both sides of the border for the first time in history. So it is a very important
No, I understand, and I commend you on the process. I just, the implication here is somehow you came up with a deal that was too soft, and if anything, I would argue that it was perhaps a little bit too harsh. So, but I do appreciate the process. I know that you and our former Attorney General were able to do something that had been going on for decades.
Thank you, Senator.
You've been at it now for about 2 hours. If you can stay with us till we finish the first round of questioning. We have about 5 or 6 additional questions coming. Senator Harris is next, and then we'll break at about 12:30, if that's all right.
Make a unanimous consent request, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir.
I'd like to ask unanimous consent to submit for the record the legal brief against the mercury and air toxics rule, which Mr. Pruitt supported, and stated in that brief, and I'll just quote it, it says, human exposure to methylmercury resulting from coal-fired electric generating utilities is exceedingly small, close quote. That's the quote. I also ask unanimous consent to submit for the record a recent article that quotes, I think from the New York Times, it quotes a 40-year career employee of the Oklahoma Department of Environmental Quality that has him saying these words. He, Mr. Pruitt, has advocated and stood up for the profits of businesses, be it poultry companies or the energy industry and other polluters, at the expense of people who have to drink the water or breathe the air. Other statements have been introduced for the record saying quite a different thing about Mr. Pruitt. I think it's only fair to go to someone who's worked there for 40 years that has quite a different view than the one that our witnesses expressed. Thank you.
Without objection. Senator Harris.
Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Pruitt, as an Attorney General, I know as a former Attorney General of California that we as Attorneys General have several duties, which include representing our clients, state agencies, and also the discretion and power to initiate lawsuits in our independent capacity as Attorneys General. Would you agree with that?
Some states provide more latitude that than others.
Does your state?
Our state is not provided constitutionally as much authority as other states.
Have you never exercised your independent capacity as Attorney General to bring a legal action?
Senator, I would have to know more specifics about what you're referring to, but in response to your question, it does.
Have you ever exercised your independent capacity as the Attorney General of your state to initiate a legal action? Yes or no?
The litigations that we've engaged in largely have been in consultation with agencies that
largely. So you have also exercised your independent capacity as the Attorney General of your state. Is that correct?
I may have, Senator. I don't.
You don't know
if
you have or not? You've been Attorney General for your state for almost 7 years. Is that correct?
Approaching that, yes. 6 years, actually.
And I've read that you have initiated, and it has been mentioned before, 14 lawsuits in your independent capacity as the Attorney General of Oklahoma, and apparently 7 of those cases have been resolved, 6 of which you have lost. My question is, I hear that you are a lover of baseball. What would your batting average then be?
It was generally above 300, which is pretty good for a second baseman.
Yeah, my calculation is it's 142. Moving on, would you agree that as attorneys who have the responsibility for doing the work of justice, in particular as an attorney general, that we make decisions based on propriety and impropriety? We make decisions based on what is not only an actual conflict, but what is an appearance of conflict. Would you agree that's important?
I believe that's important, Senator.
Okay, and so on this issue of whether or not you would be recused if you are nominated and actually voted in as the administrator of the EPA, you have said that you will recuse yourself from the cases your office has been involved with if directed to do that. Do you agree that you also have the discretion to recuse yourself from those cases?
I believe, Senator, the rules of professional conduct, in addition to the review that OGE...
Do you believe that you have the discretion to recuse yourself from the cases that you were involved with as Attorney General?
I think it's actually stronger than that, Senator. I actually have an obligation in those instances as directed by Ethics Council, and that's the reason I indicated earlier that
independent of any direction from Ethics Council, do you agree you have the discretion to recuse yourself from those cases?
I believe that it's important to maintain...
I'm asking about whether or not you actually have the discretion, the power, to recuse yourself. Do you disagree or agree with that?
Clearly, there's a discretion to recuse.
Clearly. You're familiar with the Clean Air Act, yes?
I'm sorry, Senator?
You are familiar with the Clean Air Act?
I am.
And as you may know, Section 209, Subdivision B of the Clean Air Act recognizes California's authority to issue air pollution standards for new motor vehicles that go above and beyond federal standards. The EPA has historically recognized California's authority to issue new motor vehicle pollution standards that go above and beyond federal standards. In your opening statement, you write, "It is not EPA's mission to be against sectors of industry in general or against particular states." Will you commit then to upholding that same standard and recognizing California's authority to issue its own new motor vehicle air pollution standards?
You know, Senator, as you indicated, California was actually regulating those standards before the EPA was actually created, which is why the California waiver exists under statute.
Do you agree to uphold that same standard that has been held by your previous
I agree to review that as each administrator before me has. It's been granted at times.
Do you agree to uphold it? Reviewing and upholding are two different points.
Senator, as you know, administrators in the past have not granted the waiver, and in fact have granted the waiver. That's a review process that will be conducted.
What is your intention, sir?
I don't know without going through the process to determine that, Senator, and one would not want to presume the outcome.
In the 14 cases that have been previously mentioned, in each of those cases, regulated companies were also a party to your suits. Is that correct?
In some instances, yes.
In most of them. Can you name a few instances in which you have filed a lawsuit in your independent capacity as Attorney General against a corporate entity for violating state or federal pollution laws?
Senator, I have a list here that's been provided.
Can you name them, please?
Sure. There's a list that has been...
Can you name one?
Yes. The first is the Mayhard Egg Farm involving a CAFO situation and a cleanup of a large hen operation that affected water quality.
Did you file a lawsuit in that case, sir?
I did, Senator.
Okay, and what was the outcome of that case?
We received a good outcome against them.
And the name of that entity was what?
Mayhard Egg Farm.
And can you name any other cases where you have actually filed a lawsuit against a corporate entity for violating federal pollution laws?
In fact, that case was brought in conjunction with the EPA, and I want to address something, Senator, earlier. When you say independent capacity, those cases that you referred to, the list of cases, were as an extension of the DEQ in the state of Oklahoma, an extension of agencies at the state level that had authority granted to them by this body that we were.
And I understand that role as a former Attorney General, but that is you representing your client. I'm asking about your independent capacity as the Attorney General of your state. Let's move on. On the issue of mercury.
I would suggest that the Senator's time has expired in terms of moving on. Thank you. I would like to introduce for the record a letter by J.D. Strong, who is the Director of the Oklahoma Department of Wildlife Conservation, who, in reference to the submission recently by the ranking member, makes reference to that a former employee who is retired from the state of Oklahoma and is currently serving as vice chairman of the Oklahoma chapter of the Sierra Club. So that the references are from now someone who is no longer a state employee, but the vice chairman of the Oklahoma chapter of the Sierra Club. But this letter from Mr. Strong goes to talk about the efforts by Attorney General Pruitt, who says for the past 6 years, General Pruitt has been instrumental in many of our successes and has never asked me to compromise regulatory efforts to benefit industry. He says, on the contrary, all of our projects and cases that involved his office were given staff support at the highest level and more often than not resulted in more stringent environmental protection. He has been a strong ally in defending our ability to continue the great progress that we made in protecting Oklahoma's environment.
Mr. Chairman, let me ask, in response, let me just ask for unanimous consent to, for the record, and this is on behalf of Senator Whitehouse, rebuttal articles for Mr. Pruitt's claim on litigation against fossil companies. Top line points from these articles are, one, that they are fraud cases first and foremost. Second, some were brought by his predecessor, Drew Edmondson. The case, third point, a case against BP was filed and left dormant, at least per E&E publication. And also that Mr. Pruitt fought against the participation of state whistleblowers in the litigation. That was a reference to PRUITT action. Thank you.
Without objection. Good. Senator Sullivan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and General Pruitt. It's good to see you again. Thank you for your willingness to serve, and to your family. As you know, it's a team effort, so I want to thank them as well. I appreciated your opening statement, particularly your written statement, and I want to emphasize we all want clean air. We all want clean water. My state of Alaska has some of the cleanest air, cleanest water, pristine environment literally in the world. But your emphasis on the ability to do both, to grow an economy, to develop our resources responsibly, and protect the environment, I think is very, very important, and I appreciate that focus. I believe the EPA needs a serious course correction. As Senator Ernst talked about, there's a lot of anger, even fear of this agency throughout many parts of the country, and I believe you are the right person to provide that course correction and do something that's very important, which is regain the trust of the American people that I think has been lost in a lot of places in America because of the overreach, because of the lack of focusing on the law. So there's been a lot of discussion this morning about cooperative federalism. And can you explain it in a little more detail? Is that your term, or is that a term that, did you come up with that, or is that something that was actually directed by Congress?
Directed by Congress, Senator.
And so in the Clean Air Act and the Clean Water Act, who was given, what entity in our Republican form of government was given the primary responsibility over clean air and clean water in the United States?
Well, as you know, Senator, under the Clean Air Act, there's something called state implementation plans that the EPA and the states review together, but the states have that responsibility.
So isn't it correct, actually, in the law, it says the primary responsibility under the Clean Air Act and Clean Water, and who directed that?
Congress.
Okay, so when you're talking about cooperative federalism, that's not some Scott Pruitt invented. You are focusing on the intent of the Congress.
Probably more so than any statutes that have been adopted by Congress historically. The environmental statutes that we know, from clean water to clean air, to Safe Drinking Water Act, many pieces of legislation, Congress has been very explicit, very specific at saying that cooperative federalism, the role of the states, is important, should be respected, and should be emphasized.
So let me show you a chart here. This is the waters of the U.S. And the states and entities that sued to stop that rule. 32. Democrats and Republicans and independents. Do you think this is an example of cooperative federalism? And if not, if you're confirmed, what are you going to do to get back to what is not a Scott Pruitt idea? It's the direct direction of the Congress of the United States.
Senator, when you think about the relationship between the EPA and the states are not mere vessels of federal will. They don't exist simply to carry out federal dictates from Washington, D.C. There are substantive requirements, obligations, authority, jurisdiction granted to the states under our environmental statutes. That needs to be respected. When it's not respected, That is what spawned most of this litigation that has been referenced here today. And why does it spawn it? Because it matters.
Yep.
It matters that the states participate in the way that Congress has directed, and they've been unable to do so for a number of years.
So again, cooperative federalism, you're carrying out the will of Congress when you're focused on that issue.
That's exactly right. The expertise, the resources, the knowledge, the awareness of how to fix environmental issues at the local level is something that's important for the entire country to know.
So I am a former Attorney General myself who's sued the EPA. And some of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, Judge Booker's comments, I think he tried to equate a little bit suing the EPA, not caring for Oklahoma's children. Do you care about Oklahoma's children?
Without question. I've got a couple sitting behind me.
14 lawsuits. And again, Senator Bozeman mentioned this. What has been the primary focus of those lawsuits? It's not that you don't care about the environment, is it?
Absolutely not. I mean, it's something I care very much about the environment. It's to restore the relationship and ensure the relationship that Congress has directed, the role of the states in improving our environment. There's an idea in Washington that the states, those in Oklahoma or in Alaska or other parts of the country, don't care about the water we drink or the air we breathe. The farmers and ranchers, those in industry in the state of Oklahoma that I'm aware, most of them are very committed to that. When they have not been, we have taken enforcement action against them.
And just one final question. A lot of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle spend a lot of time, and I think Senator Sanders is up next, vilifying the oil and gas industry, somehow bad actors, polluters. According to the American Petroleum Institute, 364,000 Oklahomans work in the oil and gas industry or related service sectors. Are these people bad actors? Are they polluters? Can you describe, you talk about the good people in your written statement. Who are these people, and are you representing them when you're bringing these kind of actions? Are they evil people?
No, Senator. They want to comply with the law. They want to know what's expected of them. They care about the air they breathe and the water they drink, and they want to make sure that the EPA is partnering with state agencies and industry to ensure that that outcome occurs.
And aren't these hundreds of thousands of people part of that industry?
Absolutely. In fact, 25% of our entire state budget in Oklahoma is from that industry. This is a state concern. And more than that, we have significant regulation over this industry. Our Corporation Commission has oversight over many of these issues. And so we have regulatory bodies from DEQ to the Corporation Commission to others that are involved in making sure that the air we breathe and the water we drink is clear in the state of Oklahoma.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Gillibrand.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Pruitt, for being willing to serve this administration, for your interest in public service and your past public service.
Thank you, Senator.
I want to talk to you about some of the constituents in my state and the challenges, the very real challenges we face. First, we had millions of people's lives upended with Superstorm Sandy. I mean, millions of people. We had parents who lost their children who drowned because of surges of water coming through their homes, through the streets. The devastation was literally unparalleled in my state. It was just something we had never seen before. And we are going to be looking to you to protect these families and protect these communities, because we know with global climate change, the incidence of superstorms and violent weather impacts is changed. It's very, very different. And you've already told folks that you do believe that global climate change is real. It has been caused by human activity. Do you believe also that sea levels are rising?
Senator, I believe that the EPA addressing this issue because the Massey EPA case and the endangerment fund has obligations to address the CO2 issue.
Over time, your mattress goes through a lot. For a better night's sleep, we recommend you replace it every 8 years. And with free delivery and our up to half-price winter sale, now's the perfect time to replace yours at Dreams. Now with free delivery.
It's one of the reasons why
housing.
these storm
They were
surges were
protesting
so high.
like citizens in any country have the right to protest. about when such a situation happens. And there was very much use of tear gas, of rubber bullets, also of live bullets by the police. All that is a fact. And there was this confrontation which ended with the death of a villager and of a policeman.
I appreciate your passion on this issue.
One of the other issues that we talked about that I think is equally as concerning is issues of mercury that have been raised, about asthma rates that have been raised, about groundwater polluted. I've looked at your record. Most of the lawsuits you filed as Attorney General were related to businesses, specifically what was important for your state in terms of employers and businesses. And the few lawsuits you did file about human safety were few and far between. But this role as head of the EPA, you're going to have a much more important role to play. And I want to talk specifically about mercury. If you believe that mercury is a threat to public health, but oppose the remedy of reducing mercury air pollution from power plants because it's too costly, what then do you think you should do or what should be done to address the mercury pollution?
Well, let me say, Senator, the mercury is something, it is a hazardous air pollutant under Section 112. It is something that the EPA has authority to regulate and should regulate. It should do so, though, within the framework established by this body. And the Supreme Court said that the EPA did not follow the cost-benefit obligations. It's not that the benefits outweigh the cost. It's just that they simply didn't engage in a proper record-based support for their rule. And so that goes back to earlier questions with other senators about the process mattering, being committed to the rule of law and the rulemaking authority that Congress has given the EPA, and making sure that as rules are passed, that they can be upheld in court.
But I need you also to be worried about human health. I understand that there's a cost, but when you're talking about lives, when you're talking about children who can't breathe, I've been to the emergency room at 2 in the morning with the child who can't breathe. It's a horrible thing. We've had children die in New York City because none of their teachers, no administrators in their schools knew what to do when a child has an asthma attack. It's a huge problem. So I need you to care about human health and really believe that the cost when human health is at risk, when people are dying, is far higher than it is the cost to that polluter to clean up the air and change their processes. I need you to feel it as if your children sitting behind you are the ones in the emergency room. I need you to know it.
And Senator, I would say to you, there are certain instances where cost can't even be considered, as you know. Those criteria pollutants under our NAAQS program, cost is not even a factor because human health is the focus.
So let's talk about that. So you and I previewed this in my office. We have a horrible problem in New York State with Superfund sites and with groundwater that is polluted. We have PFOA in our water. We have the largest PCB Superfund site in the United States in the Hudson River. When families who don't have money fish in the Hudson River, they eat those fish, they get ill. It is horrible. The contaminants are real, they are pervasive, and they are destroying lives. They're also destroying the economy because when you have contaminants all over the place, you can't sell your house. You can't put in industries that are relying on tourism. It's a huge problem. So PFOA is an example of a chemical that needs to be tested. I need you to put it #1 on your list, to test it. And if it is the carcinogen that many scientists have said it is, it needs to be banned.
The TSCA authority that's been granted by this body, you and I talked about that in your office, PFOA needs to be addressed quickly, even under the Safe Drinking Water Act as well.
Will you commit to doing that work?
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr.
Thank
Chairman.
you, Senator.
Mr. Chairman, I have a unanimous consent request. I'd like to submit for the record, and this sort of in response to a question raised by Senator Harris. And Mr. Pruitt, in his response to her question on whether he had ever filed a lawsuit against a corporate entity for violating state or federal pollution, apparently was not correct. I want to just submit for the record a list of cases that have been active under Mr. Pruitt's leadership. It notes which ones were started by his predecessor, and it shows that the case in which he mentioned in his exchange with Senator Harris, I think it was the egg case, was it Mahard egg case, actually was initiated not by Mr. Pruitt, but by his predecessor. Thank you.
Without objection. And I'd like to submit to the record as well Having heard that some of my Democrat colleagues have expressed their concerns that Attorney General Pruitt is not open to the finding of science, especially as it relates to climate change, this is not so. I'd like to call the committee's attention to a letter by the Cornwall Alliance for the Stewardship of Creation. The letter is signed by 130 scientists, economists, legal scholars, policy experts, religious leaders, and over 230 other citizens urging Attorney General Pruitt's confirmation. The group includes David Legetz, who's a PhD in climatology, professor of climatology and geography at the University of Delaware. The author praises Pruitt, stating, "Mr. Pruitt has also demonstrated understanding of and open-mindedness toward scientific insights crucial to the formulation and implementation of environmental regulation." The organization's founder and national spokesman, Calvin Beisner, is quoted in the press release announcing the letter as saying the following: "Some environmental activists are determined to prevent Mr. Pruitt's confirmation, painting him as a science denier or a climate change denier." Mr. Beisner continues, "He is neither. He's a solid, common-sense Attorney General who will bring much-needed reform to the EPA." Without objection, the letter will be submitted for the record. Senator Wicker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Mr. Ranking Member. I think it's been a good hearing so far. I think we have a lot of information that will be reassuring to the American people. One thing I do object to, though, is it's something that's happened for years since I've been a member of this committee, and that's somehow to list political contributions and suggest that somehow they make an individual suspect or not qualified. My dear friend from Rhode Island showed a poster and showed some contributions and suggested that based on those contributions from companies like Southern Company, for example, who's contributed to my campaign, that his appropriateness for the job should be challenged. And so I'm glad that the chairman had added to the record this article from September 6th from the Wall Street Journal, September 6th of last year, pointing out that Democratic presidential candidate Hillary Clinton raised significantly more money than Donald Trump from the oil and gas industry. Individuals who work for oil and gas companies donated $149,000 to Mr. Trump's GOP campaign as of the date of July 30, compared with $525,000 to Mrs. Clinton. Mr. Chairman, I'm glad you put this in the record, and presumably based on that argument, Hillary Clinton would be suspect were she to have been nominated for the position of heading the EPA. Now, Mr. Attorney General, let's talk about states as partners. And I enjoyed your exchange with Senator Cardin about the Chesapeake Bay program. As I understand, you actually applaud the Chesapeake Bay program, and particularly the way the EPA worked with states as partners. Is that correct? And could you enlarge on that?
Senator, I absolutely applaud the effort by the states to join together in a 6-state coalition to address the quality of the Chesapeake Bay's water quality. I mean, that's what we did in Arkansas. Oklahoma and Arkansas did with the scenic Illinois River. That's already been talked about with Senator Bozeman and others. And so I think the effort that they engaged in was something that other states ought to model, and the EPA came alongside and took that TMDL and is providing assistance to those 6 states with respect to that agreement.
Now, with regard to the Clean Power Plan and the Waters of the United States rules, where did those regulations go wrong in this respect?
Well, with respect to the Clean Power Plan, in the cases, the Supreme Court has actually said it was an unprecedented step that the Supreme Court took. Never in history had the Supreme Court issued a stay against a rule like the Clean Power Plan. And they did so because of the likelihood of success on the merits, in the sense that the Clean Power Plan did not reflect the authority of Congress given to the EPA to regulate CO2. As an example, with respect to power generation, there has to be a significant finding that it poses risk to public health and welfare. They did not do that. They did not go through the proper processes of inside the fence and regulations of facilities, power generation facilities. So those matters, Senator, are about rule of law, and the same is true with the Waters of the United States rule.
Now, and I have not delved into this as an attorney as you have, but I can tell you that the Department of Environmental Quality in my state told me very emphatically that the Clean Power Plan would put us out of business because we would not have had an alternative to the coal that we use, and so I hope we can continue to make progress on this issue. Let me ask you about wood products. Federal government buys a lot of lumber, uses a lot of wood in construction, and procures a lot of wood. There are standards certifying that the forests are appropriate. One is the American Tree Farm System. Another is the Sustainable Forestry Initiative. EPA seems to like a certification program called the FSC, the Forest Stewardship Council. Problem is, with this certification program, it excludes 90% of the lumber grown in the United States of America. We have had a lot of activity on both sides of the aisle in challenging this, and I object also to a so-called interim recommendation made by EPA in this regard. As far as I'm concerned, it is discrimination against domestic wood, and now they have come back and told us that this interim recommendation is under review. Could you comment about both of these, the idea of an interim recommendation being imposed on an entire industry, and also give us any thoughts you have about using the Forest Stewardship Council certification model as opposed to these other perfectly good sustainable forestry initiative and American Tree Farm System.
And if I could ask you to do it briefly as the Senator's time.
Senator, as you and I discussed in our meeting, I'm very concerned about the latter issue and making sure that all voices, all options are considered as something the EPA administrator should do, and I would seek to do if confirmed. With respect to the interim step, I think that there's a concern that many have offered throughout the last several years that regulators in Washington, not just the EPA, are seeking to use guidance or other steps to avoid what would be called formal rulemaking that Congress has obligated those agencies to perform to ensure exactly what you just described, that all voices are heard. And that's unfortunate when agencies do that, because that's an abuse of the process.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you,
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Sanders.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I apologize for being late, but we were at a hearing with Congressman Price, who is the nominee for HHS, and perhaps not a great idea to have important nominating hearings